Another vintage asset retired about the same time were the dive suits that looked like something out of a Jules Verne novel. The classic Mark V dive helmet and suit underwent some alterations over the years, but this was basically the gear that divers suited up in from the 1890s to the 1980s.
It's very bulky, it's very safe. It was, believe it or not, it's really good for going inside wrecks, working in there, things like that, because you have the hard hat, you have a nice thick canvas protection over the top of you. But the whole rig's roughly about 194 to 198 pounds. It's a good rig, it's solid for working on the inside. It wasn't for this rig in the Pearl Harbor, we'd never got the ships up, the ones that we did.
Pearl Harbor. It was here in 1941 that Navy divers donned their Mark V's to do their part in the most massive salvage challenge in U.S. history.
It's a nice morning here at Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands. People are queued up to go out and see the USS Arizona Memorial. But in 1941, on a Sunday morning, the whole place was in flames. It was chaos. Ships were sinking, people were dying. The Imperial Navy had attacked the U.S. fleet stationed here at Pearl Harbor.
After the attack was over, they found that 21 vessels had been sunk or damaged. 7 of those vessels moored along the edge of Ford Island, the great battleships, the main battle line. The fires did burn out of control, but fortunately, the shipyard and the dry docks were intact. So the mechanics and the facilities were available to raise this fleet.
You can imagine what it was like for divers to work in this environment. The waters of Pearl Harbor were filled with oil. There was debris. There were bodies from the ships that had been thrown overboard.
After the initial rescue and recovery efforts, the salvage crews first dealt with the ships that suffered relatively little damage. Underwater patches to the hulls and pumping operations got several vessels either back into service or able to make it to dry dock for final repairs. Within a few months, several ships returned to active duty. Others required more extensive repairs, but it was the capsized vessels that presented bigger challenges.
The Japanese force that came in from the west made a torpedo attack on one of the ships, the mine layer Oglala. Because of the shallow draft of that vessel, the torpedo actually traveled under the hull, striking the Helena behind it.
Well, the Helena exploded, and the shock waves from the torpedoes burst seams in the Oglala. And she took on water slowly and sank. She just turned sideways and went down. Veterans like to say she died of fright.
The salvage team's unusual challenge was to roll over and refloat the massive old mine layer. The solution involved the use of a pontoon system, originally devised to raise sunken submarines and ships off the bottom.
The idea of the salvage pontoon is to float them to either side of the sunken vessel. You then fill them with water, drop them down, pass cables underneath the vessel that's sunk, and secure these pontoons to either side.
Once these were on the bottom, next to the ship, they would bring hoses along to pump out the water and fill these now with air. This gradual process allows these pontoons to be used as a lifting body to bring that ship up to the surface, so these act as life vests around the ship.
But the Oglala, lying on its side in the harbor, required a new and untested approach to using the pontoons. One was positioned at the bow, 3 on the stern, and 6 on one side of the vessel. Chains were attached to the pontoons along the side, passed under the ship, and secured to the starboard side. Then the pontoons were pumped full of air. As they rose to the surface, the chains rolled the ship back over. The first righting attempt failed because some of the chains broke loose. But 12 days later, on April 23, 1942, the Oglala was successfully pulled upright. Divers could now patch the damaged hull. The water was pumped out of the ship so it could be moved to dry dock, and soon the Oglala was seaworthy again. Today, the USS Missouri, the battleship on which the Japanese surrender was signed, is moored on Pearl Harbor's Ford Island. But in 1941, this is where the USS Oklahoma was attacked. After being hit by several torpedoes, she capsized. The Oklahoma's elaborate salvage plan involved the installation of 21 large winches on Ford Island, an equal number of towers attached to the ship itself, and steel cables rigged between ship and shore.
Essential to the righting of the Oklahoma were electric motors. And what they came up with was a recycled motor that was once used on the Honolulu trolleys. They devised a way that they could pull the ship over slowly over a period of days, months, almost a year. Without that motor, that slow process could never be done.
The ship came afloat in early November 1943 and was sent to dry dock for final repairs. After this Herculean effort, the Oklahoma was deemed too old and damaged to return to service. There were never plans to raise the Arizona, and she remains beneath the memorial to those who perished during the attack.
In the assessment of this battleship, they found that she was unserviceable. Her damage was so extensive, but she was salvageable, and they would take the upper works or her superstructure, cut it away, and place it in a scrapyard so they could be used in the war effort. But the two aft turrets number 3 and 4, those were taken from the ship and placed as coastal guns here in Hawaii, so they did serve another purpose. But the other part of it was that the crew, nearly 900 men, still rest inside that ship.
The Pearl Harbor salvage operations helped alter the course of history. But one recent spectacular salvage project was not about changing history. It was about preserving it. The effort to salvage the damaged ship stationed at Pearl Harbor in 1941 required Navy and civilian divers to spend 20,000 hours underwater. Deep Sea Salvage will return on Modern Marvels.